This is the AGS World History textbook. Some pre-reading tips before we get started on this chapter. Notice the boxes on the left-hand side of each page. Those contain the vocabulary words, which are significant words you're going to need to help you understand each section of the chapters that you read through. So take note of those, read the words, and understand the definitions as you're reading through the text. Another pre-reading strategy would be to look at the headings and the subheadings. Usually the subheadings are in a different color. That helps you to find the location of information that you're looking for much easier, rather than try to read through the entire text of the book and look for one word or an answer to a particular question. Use those subheadings to help you organize your reading. And then finally, it helps to look at the section or chapter review questions before reading. This strategy helps you identify the information that's going to be needed to answer those questions for your assignments, and it's going to give you a guided reading strategy to follow, so that when you do come across the answer to one of those questions, you'll easily be able to locate it and answer it instead of reading to the end of the section and then trying to go back and locate that information. So reading the review questions first is another good strategy to follow. This is Chapter 3, Civilization Develops in the Middle East. Section 1, the Sumerians. About 7,000 years ago, several groups of people settled between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. The rivers helped them raise crops and care for their goats, cows, and sheep. We call where they settled Mesopotamia. This word means the land between the rivers. Every spring, the rivers flooded their banks and made the land fertile, but few trees grew there. Also, the land had little stone for building. Yet, in this place, an unusual people, the Sumerians, began to build a great civilization. Who were the Sumerians? The Sumerians were one of many different tribes that lived in this area. They shared a common language and religion. In the beginning, they lived in the hills northeast of Mesopotamia, but gradually they moved into the river valleys. There they built several large city-states, or cities surrounded by smaller villages. More than 20,000 people lived in the largest cities. The Sumerians built strong protective walls around these cities. They also built canals and dikes, banks of earth that keep out water. Then they drained the nearby water-soaked land and irrigated the farmlands. Each city had its own government. In the beginning, the people chose their leader, but then the city-states began to fight with each other. Military, or army, leaders became the rulers. What was life like in Sumer? Sumerians lived far better than prehistoric humans had. Even the poorest citizens owned their own farm or house. Women had many legal or lawful rights. They could own property and run a business. Sumerian slaves could set up a business, borrow money, and buy their freedom. Children had to obey. If they disobeyed their parents could sell them into slavery. In school, teachers could beat children who made mistakes. The children's parents chose whom they would marry. What was a Sumerian home like? The Sumerians learned to make bricks by putting clay in molds. Then they baked the bricks in the hot sun. They used these clay bricks to build one-story houses. Each had several rooms surrounding an open patio. People with more money built larger two-story houses. They coated the walls with a mixture of water, sand, and perhaps other materials. Then they painted the inside and the outside of their house white. What were ziggurats? The main building in each Sumerian city was its temple. There, the people worshipped or honored their gods. Each temple was in a ziggurat, or pyramid shape, with 4 sides. A temple ziggurat was up to 6 or 7 stories high. Inside the temple, the Sumerians built rooms for their priests, or religious leaders. The priests made sure that the workers built the ziggurat correctly, but building was expensive, so the priest asked for and received a part of each farmer's crop. What were the Sumerian gods like? Like most people at that time, the Sumerians believed in gods who had human feelings. They believed that when the gods became angry, they punished the Sumerians. They made rivers flood and crops fail. To keep their many gods happy, the Sumerians built ziggurats in which to worship them. They kept statues of the gods in these temples. They also sacrificed daily to their gods by killing or burning an animal. What is the most important Sumerian invention? The Sumerians invented writing. We call their writing cuneiform. Writing probably began when the priests started to keep records. Later, the Sumerians made cuneiform more simple by creating a different symbol for each sound or word. They created 550 characters or symbols. The Sumerians had no paper. They wrote on soft clay tablets with a sharp-pointed tool called a stylus. Then they baked the tablets to make them hard. Archaeologists have found many of these tablets. Most of them are legal and business records. About 5,000 of them, however, contain our oldest known writings, hymns, stories, and poems. Some tablets list the names of cities, trees, insects, and many other things. This means the Sumerians were the first people to write down history. What other gifts did the Sumerians give us? The Sumerians may have been the first people to use a plow and a sailboat. They were the first to put wheels on carts. They also invented the potter's wheel. On this wheel, they could make more useful pottery shapes. Sumerians created arches and ramps. These curved openings and smooth stairways helped them build taller and stronger buildings. To do this, they needed to know arithmetic. They based their arithmetic on the number 60. Today, we use this number to measure time. For example, we have a 60-second minute and a 60-minute hour. Section 1, Review. On a separate sheet of paper, write true if the statement is true, or false if the statement is not true. Make each false statement true by changing the underlined word. Question number 1. The Chinese were one of many different tribes that lived in the Middle East. Question number 2. The largest Sumerian cities had more than 50,000 people. Number 3. A ziggurat is the name for a Sumerian temple. Number 4. The Sumerians built with wood. Number 5. The Sumerians invented writing. Remember, these are either true or false, and you should write the correct answer down if the answer is false. Section number 2. The Akkadians and the Babylonians. Years after the Sumerians built their city-states in Mesopotamia, Sargon I united them. He ruled a kingdom north of the Sumerians called Akkad. Because his Akkadian army used bronze weapons, they were stronger than other armies. In time, Sargon's kingdom spread from the shores of the Mediterranean Sea eastward. It covered all of the Tigris and Euphrates river valleys to the Persian Gulf. For the first time in history, one person ruled all this land. He ruled for about 35 years, from around 230-40 BC to 2305 BC. What did Sargon first borrow from the Sumerians? Sargon borrowed many ideas from the Sumerians. The most important was their system or way of writing. The Akkadians had their own language, but they used the Sumerian cuneiform to make written records. Scribes translated many Sumerian writings. That is, they changed the Sumerian words into their own Akkadian ones. In this way, the Akkadians discovered many of Sumer's ideas about religion and government. Sargon I was a strong leader. He repaired dikes and made the irrigation systems longer. His army protected important trade routes. However, soon after he died, in 2305 BC, Akkad collapsed and lost its power. Who were the Babylonians? Around 1800 BC, a new city-state called Babylon arose. People feared its powerful army. Hammurabi, the king of Babylon, fought both the Akkadians and the Sumerians and won. His kingdom stretched from the Persian Gulf northward through Mesopotamia. Hammurabi built a giant ziggurat to honor the god Marduk. He also built a wall around Babylon to protect it. The wall was 11 miles long and nearly 80 feet wide. He improved roads and helped develop trade. Merchants or traders from as far away as India and China came to Babylon to do business. Why do we remember Hammurabi? People today remember Hammurabi because he created the first system of laws. We call these laws Hammurabi's Code. He looked at the laws of all the lands he ruled, then he collected what he thought were the best ones. Hammurabi put these into a code or group of laws. He expected everyone in his kingdom to obey them. He also expected his kingdom to carry out these laws. Hammurabi ruled or reigned for almost 40 years. He was proud of all he had done during that time. Near the end of his reign, he ordered a scribe to carve his record on a large block of stone. In this way, everyone knew his laws. The scribe carved nearly 300 laws on the stone. Archaeologists found it buried in the sands of Iran in 1902. We call Hammurabi's reign the Golden Age of Babylon. After his death in 1750 BC, the Babylonians lost their power. Then Mesopotamia was again divided into small city-states. Section 2 Review. Use the words in the word bank to complete each sentence. The words will probably only be used one time. Question number 1. The first ruler to unite the city-states of Mesopotamia was? Number 2. He was the leader of the? Number 3. Around 1800 BC, a new city-state called blank came to power. Number 4. One of its great leaders was? Number 5. He collected laws from many groups of people and put them into a? Section number 3. The Phoenicians and the Hebrews. Sometimes we call the Middle East the Fertile Crescent because it is shaped like a quarter moon. We call its western tip Canaan and its eastern end Mesopotamia. Why did the Phoenicians become sailors? Around 1100 BC, a people we call Phoenicians built a number of cities in Canaan. Phoenicia was a narrow civilization squeezed between the mountains and the Mediterranean Sea. It had little land for farming. The Phoenicians did, however, live in an area with many tall cedar trees. The Phoenicians used these to build ships. Soon they became sea traders. The merchants and traders became rich and built the great cities of Tyre and Sidon. These traders sold cloth, glass, wood, and beautiful metal objects to people in other lands. Phoenician sailors carried this cargo in their ships, and they sailed back home with ivory, metals, weapons, slaves, and wine. Where did the Phoenician sailors travel? Phoenician sailors traveled to places no one else had been. They sailed to England in search of tin and copper. They traveled to Africa to trade for ivory. During their travels, they founded colonies in places such as France and Spain. About 1814 BC, some Phoenicians settled in Carthage in North Africa. Around 600 BC, Phoenician sailors may have sailed around the tip of Africa. Some historians believe they even sailed across the ocean to America. Phoenicians sailed in ships with a single sail. Many sailors pushed and pulled the oars that moved the ship forward. Phoenician sailors could sail far and wide because they mapped sea routes. They also used the North Star to navigate or steer their boats. They were the first sailors to do this. What gifts did the Phoenicians give us? We remember the Phoenicians for two important reasons. First, they developed a simple alphabet of 22 letters. These few letters took the place of the 550 letters of the cuneiform alphabet. The Greeks and Romans used this alphabet to build their own. The English and Spanish languages also use it. Second, the Phoenicians spread the culture and the products of the Middle East to many places. They did this through their trade and their colonies. Because of this, important ideas spread around the world. What is the holy book of the Hebrews? The Hebrews are another Middle Eastern people. For many centuries, Hebrew scribes wrote books to tell their story. These books have been collected into one large book that we call the Bible. We find the story of the Hebrew people in the first part of today's Bible. Where did the Hebrews come from? Abraham was the first of the Hebrew people. The Hebrew part of the Bible says that God called Abraham's family out of Mesopotamia. With his family and relatives, he was to go to a new country. Historians think that this happened sometime between 2000 and 1500 BC. For many years, they wandered the deserts as nomads. During a famine, a time when crops do not grow and there is no food, they traveled to Egypt. Years passed, and the Hebrews got large in number. The Egyptian rulers made them slaves. Who led the people out of slavery? A Hebrew leader named Moses led his people out of Egypt sometime between 1300 and 1200 BC. According to the Bible, the people wandered in the desert to the east of Egypt. There Moses climbed Mount Sinai to pray, and there the Hebrew God Yahweh gave Moses 10 commandments. These rules told the Hebrews what to do to live peacefully with God, themselves, and other people. The commandments became the roots of the religion of the Hebrews. Today we call this religion Judaism. We now call the Hebrew people Jews. What covenant did the Hebrews make? The Hebrew people believed that their God had made a covenant or agreement with them. They promised to honor Yahweh's commandments and worshipped him alone. In return, God promised to protect the Jews. The land of Canaan would belong to them forever. After many years of wandering, the Hebrews came to Canaan. There they fought the people who lived in Philistia along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. In time, the Hebrews settled 2 kingdoms in Canaan, Judah and Israel. Later, invading armies destroyed both kingdoms. Today we call this land Palestine. A large part of Palestine is the Jewish state of Israel. What gifts did the Hebrews give us? The Hebrews were the first people to believe in one all-powerful God. They set a high standard of morality, or the right way to behave towards others. Their commandments and their morality stood out in the ancient world. Section 3 Review. Choose the letter of the answer that correctly completes each sentence. Write your answers on a separate sheet of paper. Question 1. The Phoenicians lived in. Number 2. The Phoenicians became famous as. Number 3. The Phoenicians were the first people to use the blank to help them navigate. Number 4. The holy book of the Hebrew people is called the. Number 5. The Hebrews differed from other ancient people because they believed in one. This is the end of chapter 3. Before you begin the chapter review, take note of the chapter summary at the end of each chapter before the review. Many times you can find the answers to the questions you're looking for in these chapter summaries without going back and rereading the entire chapter. You'll complete the entire chapter review for each chapter, which includes the comprehension identifying facts, comprehension multiple choice questions, and the comprehension understanding main ideas. You do not have to complete the critical thinking piece of the chapter review. Once you complete the entire chapter review along with each lesson review, please submit it to your instructor to be graded.